And she looks human, but she has these very proud horns, and she has these beautiful wings. And so Maleficent is just happy and joyous and just filled with all the good that you could ever possibly want for anybody in life. Didn't you feel that way as a child? Do you remember just no worries? No, now, I got that some of us have stories. I'm not ignoring that some of us have stories. I got stories. But some of us, or there might have been a time, but the truth is, even as a child, we had the ability to have stuff and still have those moments. So we had moments where we could use our imagination and really believe that you could be anything you wanted to believe. Or you could be anything you wanted to be. You didn't at that point have all the restrictions. So she was this young, sweet, free fairy that was just gorgeous, stunning eyes. And I can remember having that contrast in my life. I can remember having that innocence of anything is possible, and then having the reality of an incredibly unhealthy household. I was one of those that had both going on. But the beautiful thing about this teaching is that all of that can exist, and you and I, because of what we learn, our metaphysical truths and principles, we get to learn that we get to choose to be more, to be different, to be more expressed, to be prosperous, to be healthy, to be more loving. We are never at the mercy of that. So Maleficent is growing, and at one point she is the three sweet fairy godmothers that you would have seen in Sleeping Beauty. They animated them so perfectly. They came there and they were all upset, and they say that there's a human at the border because the humans and the fairies didn't mix because they were not being kind to one another. And so she runs to the border, and what's standing there are these tree guards. They look like trees, but they're guards because everything in this fairy kingdom is like fairy-like. And they say, no, don't go. And she said, but I've never seen a human. I want to go. And she goes to the border, and she calls out this young man, and she says, come out. And he says, no, they're going to kill me. And because the human had stolen a jewel from the lake. And so she says to this human, you did something wrong, but we won't kill you for that. So she calls him out, and he comes out, and there's this young man, and his name is Stefan. She finds out later on. And she says, give me the jewel, and she takes it, and she throws it back in the lake, which confuses him. Why would you have a lake filled with jewels? And so she begins to talk to him, and they become fast friends, which provides a lot of hope that maybe at some point the fairies and the humans might at one time be able to live kindly and happily together as neighbors and not as contrasting kingdoms. So they grow in their friendship, and they spend time together, and he returns, and they visit, and this friendship really, really grows, and they begin to trust each other. Now, at some point, what happens, Stefan goes back off to his kingdom, and while at his kingdom, he grows as a human grows, with greed and a want for power. Not a very metaphysical young man. And so in his greed of growing, he's maturing, and you can see that he's now wanting more of what the humans want. At one point, the king of that kingdom and all of his forces came to the fairy kingdom to strike them down because for some reason the king was threatened by these fairies. Go figure. So they go there to do this, but Maleficent, who's now grown and mature, is strong, and she beats them down with some of these tree guards. The king is very angry. Okay? So Maleficent, though, as the guardian of the village, She's just done what she's supposed to do. Fast forward, or not fast forward, change at one moment, for a moment. Remember in your life when you started losing your innocence? Can you remember that first broken heart? The first broken promise? The girl you thought would be forever, the guy you thought would be forever? Parents splitting? And suddenly that life of innocence started to have a tear in its fiber. And all of a sudden the reality that life will always be good and pure and possible starts to have a different feeling. Do you know what I'm talking about? So that happens to most of us. Most of us at some point have to deal face to face with those aspects of life that start to harden our heart. But the truth still remains that we are still at choice. We have what has happened to us, but what has happened to us does not have to define us. Do you hear me? I want you to hear that. What has happened does not have to define us. It is simply what happened. And that's a tough concept. If you think that the perpetrator of what happened has to suffer or be punished, if you think you have to find fault or blame, it'll be harder for you to see it simply as what happened and to let go of it. Are you with me? This is a key to your freedom. Being able to identify with your essence and not with the story is the key to your freedom. Being stuck in that story is me is where we move into pain and suffering. So Maleficent is doing what she does, and years later the king is very ill. Now remember, he's already doesn't like the fairies, and now he's angry because he's been defeated. And what happens is he's on his deathbed, and he calls together all the mature men of the kingdom, and he says, someone has to follow me. And if you want, the person who will follow me will be the one who brings me Maleficent's head. Go and bring me her head, and you will rule after me. And so suddenly you see Stefan standing there in the bedroom of the king as he's taking care of him, and you see him think. And I know I wondered, maybe you wondered, those of you who saw the movie, wow, is he going to warn her? Or is he going to take advantage of his familiarity to get what he wants? Greed and power. So you don't know right away, and a few minutes later, sure enough, he shows up years later. They haven't visited for a long time. So years later, he shows up there, and he calls her out, and she lands ever so slightly because she has these beautiful, stunning wings that are so powerful. Now remember what the wings represent. The wings represent the power to rise above. The power to move away from those things that have us restricted. So she had these wings, and these were her freedom. Freedom from what was, freedom from story. So he goes, and she hasn't seen him for years, but they make up and they spend time. And as it says in the movies, in the years will melt away. And they are hugging on each other and spending some time, and he offers her some water. And what you don't know right away is he's put a sleeping potion in the water. So he puts her to sleep. And here she is, she goes to sleep with this innocence and this love in her heart for this man. And while sleeping, he takes out his dagger. He has placed her in a rock so he could get the head. And he takes his dagger, and you could see he's pained. But he's focused. He's still focused. And he raises the dagger, and he realizes he can't do it, and slams it into the ground. So I'm thinking, oh, good. He got a hold of himself. Au contraire. He doesn't want to take her head, and he doesn't want to kill her. So he takes out this other tool and he removes her wings. He cuts away her freedom. And he takes them back off to the king, and he lays them on the king's bed, and the king says, "You have done well, my son." So now he's got to live with this in his heart, that he's done this. And Maleficent wakes up, and she's in agony. She's in emotional agony, and she's in physical agony, because now her freedom is gone, and that which made her beautiful and unique is gone. Do you remember a time in your life, a real fall from grace? I do. I remember thinking there are these individuals I should have been able to trust, and found out I couldn't trust them. So the fall from grace for me was not being able to move freely in my life. Because now once that reality set in, once a new reality set in for me, I had to now protect myself, and I had to become something else, and I had to be able to learn how to function in the world in a way that I kept myself safe, and I had to rise above it. And the only way I knew as a young child to rise above it was my imagination. We lived in a fairly depressing apartment with railroad rooms. You know what railroad rooms are? Railroad rooms are an apartment where one room is after the other. There's no interesting anything. You pass through to get all the way through. And my parents had a wing-back chair, and I would sit in this chair, and I would always imagine, now this is such ill use of the imagination, and I would imagine situations where I needed to be rescued. So initially, though, that started with I had to be the victim, because then I wanted to be rescued. So I secured this victim consciousness in my body and in my memory at a cellular level. So for years I became the victim. You following me? That is a misuse of the imagination. But I did that for a very long time because it was my coping mechanism. So in the science of mind and metaphysics, we teach you, use your imagination, but use it to lift and empower and to create a new, healthier reality in your being. So Maleficent wakes up and she doesn't have her wings. But the Stefan's happy because the king dies, he becomes king, and then he has a child. Maleficent shows up at the celebration of this child, and he is shaking in his boots because he thought if he took her wings away, he was safe. Au contraire. He was not safe. She still had all her magic and all her power because it wasn't just in the wings. And so what happened was she showed up, and he's afraid, and he's like, please, please, please don't do anything to my beautiful young daughter. So that's where Sleeping Beauty had that curse put upon her. And she says to Sleeping Beauty, you will sleep, you beautiful young being, until you are 16, and on the day of your 16th birthday, you will prick your finger on a sewing needle, a spinning needle, and then you will fall fast asleep, only to be awakened by a kiss of true love. So the king, in panic, tells the fairy godmothers, take my daughter, take her away and raise her somewhere so she's safe. And then they took all the spinning needles, all the spinning wheels in all of the kingdom, and they broke them and they burned them in the dungeon of the castle. That's what we do when we think we can manipulate our outside world to keep us safe, right? Well, that person isn't working. Maybe this guy will work. Well, that job isn't working. Let me go over there. Well, I don't want to live in Jersey City. Maybe I can live in Florham Park. No, Florham Park isn't working. Maybe I can live in Lincoln Park, and we try the geographic solution. So when we are busy as humans trying to create solution on the outside, we create a lot of chaos in our life. And we do a lot of manipulation of the outside world, and it's never effective. Ever effective. The only way we transform is to do it where? Inside. So Maleficent knows that the fairy godmothers have the baby. She knows where they are. And you're not quite sure what she's going to do, but she said she'd leave her alone till her 16th birthday. So she goes and she's now observing the rearing of this child. And the problem was that this child was so beautiful and so filled with innocence that Maleficent started to watch her, and she started to fall in love in a maternal way. She started to love on this baby and love her innocence and love her growing. And what happened was the pain of not having her wings and the pain of being betrayed began to melt. And she became somebody new. She tried to hold on to her evil being, but she became something new. And this young girl, whose name I cannot remember, Cinderella. No, what's her name? Aurora, thank you. Yeah, wrong fairy tale. I did the same thing. So Aurora is growing, and now all of a sudden she meets Maleficent, and she knows she's been watching her. And Maleficent can't even try to be mad because the pain and the scar around her heart has been melted. Now, sometimes that happens in our own lives. Sometimes we find that person that helps us to feel safe, and the pain in our heart melts away so that the good of our heart gets to be expressed. Or we find a spiritual community where we become safe, or we find a bunch of spiritual practices where we feel safe. And then the scar that was who we were, that breaks away, and who we want to be starts to emerge. Do you know that feeling? I bet you do, because you're sitting here. You're someone who found a way to not be the pain and the suffering. So what happened with Maleficent is that she just became crazy in love with this young girl, and now she wanted to take away the curse. But she was so powerful, when she made the curse, she made it that nobody would be able to undo it. Nobody. So on her 16th birthday, after all the spinning wheels and everything were burned and broken, this young girl found her way back to the kingdom because someone told her who her father really was, because she hadn't known her father all these years. And she went back there and she found her way down to the basement. I don't know what she was looking for. She found her way down to the basement, and magically, because of the curse, one spinning wheel resurrected itself, and she touched it and she fell into a sleep. Now, in the meantime, there had been a young man who had come into the kingdom, and they had eyes for each other. So they tried to put him next to her bed, hoping that he would kiss her and he would be the true love. But he kissed her, and it was nothing. Nothing. Wasn't it? Didn't do anything. Do you ever have a false God in your life? Have you had a false way or someone, or a false belief in something that you thought was going to be it? Some of us have. So what happened as the story continues is that Maleficent was in pain because now this curse she put upon her was showing up. And she went over to, what's her name again? Aurora, thank you. She goes to Aurora, and she's so sad, and she's apologetic, and she leans over to kiss her, and it just so happened that she was the true love that Aurora needed. So Aurora wakes up. What woke you up? I had a spiritual teacher who was so beautiful and so profound and so unconditionally loving that she was my touch point for the rest of my life. So I learned what was possible. What is that for you? Who is that person? What is that practice? What was that thought? Where you got to resurrect yourself. There's more of the story. I won't tell you the rest. You'll have to watch the movie. But it's good. It's good. There's a little battle, but it's good. It turns out in the end. The main thing is though the love, and that the fact that the love melted the pain in her heart. That's what matters. And so in this teaching, we present all the skills, the tools, and everything necessary so you and I don't ever have to be at the mercy of what was. You understand? It's so important. I'm so far away from who I was, there are times I forget my own stories. I forget. And the only reason why I have to remember them sometimes is because I'm counseling or working with somebody, and I have to remember just so I can share a story enough for someone to say, wow, you're not going to be stuck with that, because I wasn't stuck with that. But it takes time for me to remember, because I forget. It just isn't who I am. And we get to live by choice. Yes? Treat with me. Hold the hand of someone next to you, please, and connect. Let's know together with absolute and complete knowing that there is a love so glorious, so grand, and so great, that this love calls us forth to be transformed, to be strong. This love calls us forth as it melts the pain, as it melts the scars. This love transforms our inner being. This love has us feel safe. This love paves the way so that we can take the steps toward being fully expressed. This knowing, this potency, lives within each of us. It is always available equally at all places, all the time. Let us feel the truth of that. And believing in what's possible, I do surrender this word and I allow it to be so. And so it is.
And so it is.
Where's my, we have a performance for you. Are you ready? Are they here? So we have a performance for you. And then what I'm going to ask you to do, and actually if I have two strong gentlemen, please, lift up my podium, not drag, but lift up my podium and move it to the side. And then what we'll ask you to do is we will ask you to make one line around the room going in this direction, and then you can avail yourself to any of the ministers up here to offer you a blessing. Thank you for this day. Thank you for being here on this day. And are we ready? Okay, whenever you're ready.
Say
all.